Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you this morning?
Good. I do sound like I'm in a barrel. Now I can hear
No,
it.
actually, you sound better than you did before. I was afraid she was in a well, and I was going to call Lassie this morning. Lassie, Julia's in a well. Help her. But you sound much better now. So we have an awesome guest this morning.
Yes. Our very awesome Cindy Byrd, our state auditor, that has done such a great job at uncovering misspent tax dollars.
Well, and that's, something that we need to bring her on here in just a second and ask her, what is her function? Because I don't even think people really understand what her function is. And she is one of the most accessible, and she's certainly the prettiest
Yes.
of all the state auditors and inspectors in recent memories. Well, just as far as I'm concerned. So we'll bring her on. Good morning.
Good morning, ladies. Thank you for having me on this morning.
Thank you for coming on with us this morning. And I definitely think you're the prettiest.
Thank you, Jeannie.
But let's talk about what is a state auditor and inspector. I think there are people out there who still don't even really understand your job function. So can you tell us what that is?
Well, that's a fair statement. Some people don't even understand that we have a state auditor. And one of the things I like for people to know is the state auditor's office is the one state agency where people get to elect the person they want to oversee their tax dollars. And so we have our duties are lined out in this Constitution as well as state statutes. We don't have as much authority as some people might think we do. We are tasked to oversee the routine financial statement audits of the state in the 77 county governments. We also do some very high-level reviews of state agencies. And then we also have a forensic audit division where we look into investigative situations only whenever we get the authorization or the request to do that. So we do have to be formally requested to do investigative audits or performance type audits. My office puts out around 350 to 400 audits every single year. They're located on my website at sai.ok.gov. We are in the middle of redoing our website to make it more accessible. So the citizens can get information that they need. But yeah, Jenny, people don't understand the work that we do, the types of audits that we do, and how it really impacts the state of Oklahoma.
There's your website, and there's your picture and a little bit about you. But I think look at all of the things. I don't know that people know the auditor serves as vice chair of the Oklahoma State Pension Commission, a member of the State Board of Equalization. I don't think people even know what these things do, let alone that you are that involved with all these. I mean, look at all of the things that she does. It's just, you're on the State School Land Commission too.
Yes, that's a very important agency that has a multi-billion-dollar trust fund that is set up to deliver the interest and proceeds from that trust each year to public education.
Yeah. So, and we may need to even have you come back on to talk about that, because I'll be honest. I mean, I know that it's there, and I know that part of the proceeds go to fund public education, but I don't even know what it does. So we're going to have you back on another day to talk even specifically about that. But it is amazing to what, and then if you go here, if you click here on your website, my goodness, look at all the audits that you do. I mean, I don't think people know that.
You know, they don't, Jenny. And I will say this, usually we just put our audit reports out and on our website. We want them to be accessible to any taxpayer who wants to know the information. But, as an auditor by nature, I'm a little introverted. Getting better at that now that I'm considered a politician. But whenever you see me out talking about an audit, it's because it's severe. The results are severe, and the taxpayers have really got to pay attention. And that's what happened whenever we put out our federal audit last month. we knew that taxpayers had better start paying attention to what was going on with their tax dollars. And we put out a 5-page press release, which is unheard of, but we wanted all of the details out there where any taxpayer in Oklahoma could understand what had happened in the state of Oklahoma.
Well, and we're going to talk about that in just a second because significant. You may have even underestimated it.
Well, and I'm curious, Cindy, I don't know if you've gone back to look, but was there a lot of traffic when you put out that 5-page press release? Did you get a lot of hits on that?
We did get a lot of hits on that. We also got a lot of requests for interviews, but those interviews, it's really hard to talk about $14 billion in expenditures in a 2-minute soundbite. So I'm really thankful for you ladies having me on to look at this in a deeper manner.
Well, and as we talked about before we went on air, the original, and I don't think people will know this either, your original audit covered how many agencies? The federal audit covered how many agencies?
Well, it covered all agencies who had expended federal dollars during fiscal year 21. It was a 200-page report, over 200 pages, and it covered the $14 billion in federal expenditures for fiscal year 21. Now, what's important to know about that number, generally the state of Oklahoma expends around $7 billion in federal expenditures each year. But because of the pandemic and the needs during that time, we were given more money, and that number increased to $14 billion.
That's a good point. So before we go on, I have to ask you the most important question of anything. So I thought girls were supposed to be bad at math. How come you're the auditor?
Well, I will tell you that math has always been one of my loves. In high school, I kept telling my grandmother I wanted to be an attorney, and she couldn't stand the thought of that. She would talk to me about it every time I was around her, and she put me on the path to becoming an accountant. But, Jenny, I would tell you that even today, I still tutor some of my hometown students that are in high school in college algebra and geometry or anything that they need. And I have to tell you, things are a lot different today than they were. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, whenever I was in school doing geometry and algebra.
Well, but, I think the important thing, and I said it as a joke, really, because I think, one of the things that we do is undervalue, women's ability to do math. And some women can't. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge math person. I knew enough to educate my kids, but man, I'm married to an engineer, and one of my sons is an engineer, and I can't talk to them about math. It's way over my.
Well, I think what I bring to the table as the auditor, I love the details, and the details are what really tells the story. And if you're not willing to get into the details and start really looking at where the money's being spent, then you're not doing the best service for the taxpayers.
Yeah. And you've done an excellent job. So with that, let's segue into. All right. So I told you this earlier. I've been kind of neglectful. I've been, doing farming stuff, and I have not read this audit, the single audit on the education part, because I didn't want to read, frankly, a 250-page report on everything. So I pulled out the part about education, and I read it this morning before we came on. And gosh, I wish I'd done it earlier, because I think I could have been a little bit more, specific, maybe even about some of the questions I'm going to ask you. But I want to say to our viewers, and we have numerous of them on Rumble, lots of them, what Cindy's office did here is, I think it's got to be unprecedented and unparalleled. It is extremely well documented. It is extraordinarily thorough, but beyond that, it's frightening.
Yeah.
It's frightening because it's clear that from this, to me, and I'll just talk about me, to me, this audit basically says, hello, I'm your state government. I don't really care what I'm doing with federal money.
Right.
I was just shocked. So first of all, kudos for this absolutely phenomenal piece of work. Outstanding. Second of all, let's just talk about the education portion. Although, there was quite a lot of work, and I think the healthcare authority was the other one that kind of scared me. In the audit, it seems like maybe, there's some issues there, but so I think Julie and I completely agree on the fact that, if you give organizations federal funds, then the federal funds kind of dictate what the agency does, number one. But number two, it tends to be nameless, faceless, free money. And I can't tell you the number of, as long as I've been involved in government, 15, 17 years, I have legitimately every year heard some elected official, usually with a desk at the Capitol, calling federal money free money.
Right.
So I think right off the bat, there's a disconnect for people who spend this money. It's not coming right out of their pocket. And so I think there's a I think we have put people in state agencies in a position of not thinking properly about federal money in the first place. And I think therefore they tend to be a little bit more neglectful. Now, maybe I'm wrong. But I think what you have here in this audit on the education part definitely indicates something like that. So let me just start. I'm going to go kind of in order.
Can I add some thoughts to that real quickly?
Absolutely.
Jenny?
Please do.
First, I mean, everyone should realize there's no such thing as free money. This is the money that the federal government takes from us and then sends back to us and tells us how we're going to spend it. So everyone needs to be aware of that. But I think there's an idea that, well, every other state's going to get it, so let's get as much as we can and let's utilize it. We're at a $32 trillion deficit, and it's growing every day. And if we don't start taking care of these funds, then we're in trouble. We know which direction we're headed. But what's even more important, of the $14 billion in federal expenditures, keep in mind, this is an audit directed by the federal government. They tell us exactly what we're supposed to audit. And it's only a small sliver of that $14 billion. So just the parts that I was directed to audit revealed this much money in misspent federal grants. Now, federal grants, and government's not a business. It is a delivery of services to the people. And whenever we report that there are mismanaged federal grant funds, what that really means is that the money intended to provide services to the citizenry was mismanaged and didn't get where it was supposed to go. Now, if I'm only auditing a sliver of that $14 billion and there was more out here that was mismanaged, and then you multiply that by 50 states, and then of course, Washington, D.C. and the districts, but the territories, we've got a problem here. And We've got to start cutting back. We've got to start paying attention to where we're spending our money and take care of it, not just in Oklahoma, but across the nation.
And I always like to remind people that there is no federal money. It's all federal debt. So every dollar comes with interest.
Exactly.
Excellent point, because that's what I was thinking about when I was reading this review or the audit. Is all I could think of was we printed money for this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So thank you, ladies. And please feel free to bust in on me anytime. All right. So let's talk about, there were in this audit, and it'll make noise, and I'm sorry about that. All right. You covered the gear funds. And this is all I'm going to talk about is just the gear funds. This is one section of that large audit. So this is the gear funds. So there were, and we'll have to, jog each other's memories. I'm sure there were 5 parts to the gear funds. There were the digital wallet or I'm not going to, do you have a friend there?
I have a friend here with me.
Does he or she want to be on camera?
Come here, Remy. Let's see if Remy wants to say hi. Come here. I think she's being a little camera shy, Remy, or
Oh,
Jenny. She
she
doesn't
wants
want to
to
be
talk.
on camera.
She wants to talk but doesn't want to be seen. Okay.
Exactly.
We understand that.
Okay. So, okay, here it is. Incentive grants to K-12 districts, Learn Anywhere, Oklahoma, Skills to Rebuild, Bridge the Gap Digital Wallet, and Stay in School. So those were the programs. So let's just talk about, I'll try to, make this small since you have a life and aren't going to want to stay on here for 4 hours. So I'll try to note it down. But here's the thing, here's what it says in your report. The state of Oklahoma as pass-through entity, and you can say what that means in a second, failed to identify all requirements imposed by the pass-through entity on the subrecipient so that the federal award is used in accordance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and the conditions of the award. So basically, overall, the state, frankly, did not appoint the right people to administer the grant. Am I correct on that?
Yes, that was one of the breakdowns.
Okay. So they didn't appoint the right people because, and I think it's important that people understand, you can't just appoint yourself a federal grant administrator.
That's correct. Right. Any kind of grant administrator has to be trained. They have to know all the different layers of laws and regulations in order to properly administer the grant and make sure they're complying with all of the requirements.
Yeah. So, and I remember that just from when I was mayor. If we wanted to get a federal grant to help us with water or something like that, you literally had to pay a federal grant administrator to help you because it's so tough to be able to do that properly. Right?
Right.
Okay. So the SAI determined that the state of Oklahoma did not evaluate the subrecipient's risk of noncompliance with federal statutes, regulations, and terms. So basically, there was nobody monitoring properly the amount of money that was going out in these awards. Is that a fair cop there?
That's correct. And, Jenny, it's important to break this down in this manner. There were 5 programs for the GEAR funds. That was the Governor's Emergency Education Relief. 2 of those had substantial issues with it. And the problem was the state of Oklahoma contracted with a vendor to be the subrecipient. But a vendor doesn't generally take on the responsibilities of determining eligibility and other factors that are required for administering a federal grant. So that was breakdown number 1. It should have been given to one of the state agencies to administer. Then they could have hired the vendor to perform the different pieces. So whenever the state of Oklahoma signed a contract with Class Wallet, the vendor, they did not put all of the necessary responsibilities that Class Wallet would have to comply with, nor did they inform Class Wallet of what their responsibilities were. So Class Wallet, as a vendor, probably thought they were fulfilling their part of the deal.
Yeah, that's what I got. That's what I got out of it. But before we go on, I do want to mention, it's okay. It makes you human, and that's a good thing. So
Jenny's rooster in the background as well. It's fine.
Yeah. So let me ask you this one question, because this was really upsetting to me. The state of Oklahoma did not ensure that the subrecipient's financial records, supporting documents, statistical records, and all other non-federal entity records pertaining to Bridge the Gap Digital Wallet Program, Stay in School Program, and the Skills to Rebuild Program were retained. And the way I understand it, you went to these agencies that were actually, doing the grant or performing the grant work, giving out the money, and you ask them for records and they go, oh, well, we accidentally shredded those.
So initially, this program was ran through the Office of Educational Quality Assurance, which was not equipped to administer any kind of a federal grant program of this nature.
Right.
So after they gave it to OEQA, and OEQA signed the contract with Class Wallet, there was no follow-up. OEQA was not aware of any of their responsibilities. And then partway through, whenever the federal government came in and started questioning some things, that's whenever they switched the responsibility over to OMES. So as auditors, whenever we come in to start doing the audit, we start asking for basic documentation. Where is this? No one had that. No, and we could tell from after we got the information from Class Wallet, no one had ever accessed this information to monitor it or to make sure these funds were taken care of or complied with federal requirements. It was just turned over.
Wow. Well, and then I understand by looking at the the documentation that OMS now is arguing with you and saying that they did have responsibility and you're misinterpreting the law or something like that. Is that what they're saying to you?
Well, they did have a very interesting response. I can assure you we did not misinterpret anything. And I mean, every time we put out an audit finding, we have the documentation for everything to back up our findings. And just the fact that OMES got involved much later is evidence enough that no one was taking care of this grant on the front end.
Yeah. So let's go to the Edmentum contract, which was administered through the statewide virtual charter school board. And basically it says the state virtual charter school board did not have prior experience overseeing federal grants, and the state did not inform this school board of the federal compliance requirements related to the administration of the federal grant. So, we always have the, poop runs downhill, for lack of a better term, right? I mean, the buck stops somewhere and then the rest of it rolls downhill, right? So, right. Yes, the state's virtual school board was supposed to oversee this grant with Edmentum. That was, we won't even explain that. We'll just say, but the state didn't tell them that they were required to do that. Is that kind of the way that played out?
That's correct. Again, whenever these funds were spread out, they did not put the funds with agencies who truly understood their responsibilities, except for the State Department of Education. Keep in mind, the State Department of Education was already managing $1 billion of expenditures during fiscal year 21, but they're set up. They have people trained to administer these grants. And that doesn't mean that we don't sometimes have findings on the State Department of Education as well. It's just that they understand the federal grant requirements and the how important it is for the reporting in order to make sure we continue to receive future grants.
So in other words,
what they did with the state virtual charter school board, they had no experience, but they did want to put some of this money through that agency so that they could get it where they wanted to spend it.
So just to kind of recap, the OSCE, the Oklahoma State Department of Education, actually has people certified. And I think you do have to be certified now, don't you, to administer federal grants?
No, you do not have to have a certification, but you do need to be proficient and have proper experience. You can't just trust this to someone who decides to hang out a shingle and say, I'm going to be a grant expert. That's not the way this works.
Yes, I've read them. I wouldn't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole. Okay, so now I'm going to go down to the Class Wallet agreement. So this is, like I said, I'm just going through the audit piece by piece, so I don't flip pages back and forth. Okay. So the Class Wallet was an agreement with, it was supposed, okay, so the state got the gear funds. And I read someplace that the state basically drew down all of the money that was given to them from the federal government before they even had a way or a plan for dispersal of that. Would you say that's correct?
That's absolutely correct. So one of the, key things to know about federal grants, you're only allowed to draw down the money with a very short time of when you plan to actually make the expenditure. So sometimes the federal government only gives you a 3 to 5 day window for you to draw down the money and then make the expenditure. So with the case of the GEAR funds, the state of Oklahoma immediately drew down the entire amount, which was a red flag to the federal government to come in and start taking a look, which is why they were looking into the GEAR funds prior to us looking into it, and they have already requested back $652,000 just based on a very high level review. But that term is called cash management, so you're not drawing down money and drawing interest on it. The feds want to keep it in their bank account as long as they can.
Sure. Well, and we'll get to that in a second because there's more to even that. So that's the first premise. And I think that should be something that people really, their ears perk up for right there, is what you just said. So it said, and this is underneath the class wallet agreement. So class wallet was brought in so the state contracted with ECHO, Every Kid Counts, Oklahoma, which is a private nonprofit organization, not government affiliated at all, except for at the time, Ryan Walters was the head of ECHO and also simultaneously the Secretary of Education. So did I misstate any of that?
You did. There was no formal contract with ECHO. It was just a verbal agreement. Which really puts the state at risk. Yes, that's worse.
Yeah.
Okay, so make sure you catch me on anything here. Okay, so the state entered into a verbal agreement with ECHO while the Secretary of Education was CEO of the nonprofit organization, and then ECHO turned around and gave that money or contracted with Class Wallet.
Okay, let me pause you there. We got some things not quite right. Okay, good. So the governor in a press release stated that he was going to utilize ECHO to help administer the funds. There was never a contract with ECHO, and ECHO never received any of these funds in their hands. What happened was the state of Oklahoma cut a check directly to Class Wallet. But the third party, ECHO, was allowed to make the set up the grant guidelines along with two other nonprofit heads. They were allowed to set up the parameters of how this grant would be administered. There was no contract to allow them to do that. It doesn't appear that they had the knowledge or understanding of administering federal grants because there were mistakes made throughout. And another thing that's important to note that I just want to correct you here, this was done prior to the executive director of ECHO being the cabinet secretary for education.
Okay, thank you for for stating that, because I don't want to state anything incorrectly, but I'm relying on my memory here, and it's apparently not helping me. So I'm so glad that you're correcting me. Okay. So,
so Jenny, I just want to I want to hammer home a really important point here.
Please do.
We put $18 million. We cut $18 million to the vendor Class Wallet and put individuals in charge of making these decisions without any kind of a contract. So therefore, if they made mistakes or the state of Oklahoma has to pay money back, there's no legal recourse to make them or to hold them responsible for their bad decisions.
So that's what it says here on page 45 too. It says the state of Oklahoma failed to limit the types of items families could purchase online, because that's a thing. I'm just going to share my screen here. Just 1 second. Well, unfortunately, you have to bring it back in. Let me share my screen here and grab in this. So this was the headline that came out. Audit finds special interest groups gave Oklahoma private schools first dibs on federal relief money. And we'll talk about that one in a second. There was another one here's the other one I wanted to share. So hang on 1 second. Let me get the other one I wanted to share in here. Sometimes it's hard to determine what you're seeing on your screen, so I apologize to viewers. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show everybody. State gave families $8 million for school supplies in the pandemic. They bought Christmas trees, gaming consoles, and hundreds of televisions. So this is kind of what we're talking about right now with the class wallet, correct?
Right. Well, Class Wallet handled both programs, Bridge the Gap and Stay in School. So what you have on your screen now is the Bridge the Gap program. And that money was given out $1,500 per family on a first come, first served basis to allow them to provide to buy education supplies or curriculum for their child to learn at home during COVID.
Okay.
And,
so
and what we found was they misspent the funds.
Okay, so it says the state of Oklahoma failed to limit the types of items families could purchase online with their digital wallet awards. According to OEQA, that's the Oklahoma Education Quality Accountability Board, staff and emails obtained by SAI, the executive director of ECHO, also serving as the Secretary of Education, it says in here, gave blanket approval of all vendors on Class Wallet system, and the approval applied to all items the vendor offered on Class Wallet system. The state did not utilize available Class Wallet system controls through which they could have limited certain vendors and pre-approved purchases made by grant recipients. In addition, the state failed to review any purchasing reports available from Class Wallet's digital wallet system, which would have alerted the state to unallowable and questionable purchases. So basically, Class Wallet said, hey, we can monitor all of this stuff. And ECHO basically said, don't worry about it. We'll, sort it all out in the wash. I mean, does that sound right?
Well, let me elaborate there just a little bit.
Okay.
So, we live in a digital age, and the state of Oklahoma uses what's called purchase cards, and we give those to our employees. In my office, our employees who have to travel overnight for audit to do audits, they have a P card, purchase card, where they can go and pay for their hotel expense. But if they were to try to take that card and use it at Walmart for anything, it's going to decline it immediately because we have it so narrowed down through the system controls that they're only allowed to use it for the one thing they can purchase. Okay. So take that example and apply it here with the Bridge the Gap. Class Wallet had system controls in place to make sure that families were only purchasing educational supplies. Now, I don't think that I don't think this was well thought out. In fact, the one email that the feds put in their report was an email that said where the executive director of ECHO said blanket approval. I don't think that person was thinking about all of the other things that could be purchased at Home Depot or Staples. Sure. That's where we come up with all of the Ring doorbells and the Christmas trees and things that were just not allowable.
Power tools and televisions.
Yeah, power tools. It comes down to the people in charge of administering a grant. They have to be finance-minded people, and they have to know the rules, and they have to know what internal controls are to make sure the money's spent the way it should be spent. But what's even more important here, as I mentioned earlier, any one of these people could have accessed this information to see what the parents were purchasing at any point. This system went live in August, and no one accessed any of these reports until February. I think I'm saying that from memory, until February of the next year. So if they had been doing their due diligence to make sure the funds were spent properly, like a true grant administrator would have done, they would have known immediately that there were purchases being made that were not allowed, and they could have stopped it.
Well, I'm going to interject something kind of off topic, but on topic. One of the things that I found out when I was mayor, I served on several different boards and commissions, just as a function of that position. And I was absolutely shocked by the number of people who would get an agenda and wouldn't read it before the board meeting, or that had questions about, misappropriation of funds, which we had, and nobody would bring it to the table to even say anything. Like if they brought it up and said, hey, I think, money's being misappropriated here. That was something bad, and it would rock the boat, make people angry. So they just flat wouldn't say it. I mean, Cindy, I think the problem stems all the way down to personal ethics, where people anymore, I just talked to a person just recently who said the exact same thing. I sit on a board, and it's a major board in the state, and the people who sit down with her at the table do not read their agendas. do not have any way of knowing what questions to ask if they're not reading their agendas. They don't read any of the supporting material, and yet they sit down at that table and want to have a discussion about something they haven't educated themselves about.
Right.
I mean, do you find this too, or is it just,
Well,
am I some kind of weird outlier? But
no, Jenny, you mentioned that that I'm also a commissioner on the Commission of the Land Office, and it was just last year that I had to bring up some very controversial stuff in a meeting. I was looking at the expenditures that the board is tasked to approve, and I saw expenditures like Mahogany Steakhouse or Topgolf, and I'm sitting here thinking, if my neighbor can't afford to pay these things or pay for these things, why is this being used for a state employee training? And I had to bring that up in a meeting of the CLO. And one of the other members said, but is it illegal? And I said, I don't care if it's illegal or not. It's abusive. And that's the kind of mentality you have to have whenever you're talking about using the taxpayers' money. So yes, it's very hard to bring those subjects up in a board meeting, but you've got to do your homework and you've got to come prepared, and you've got to rock the boat sometimes.
And that's the sad thing about it, because I've noticed, initially, like with our board, I mean, Rope has our own board, and with our board, I mean, we don't, my gosh, if I just spent money on something, Julia and everybody else would be on me like teeth on a dog.
It would be unfair if I didn't go on to say that the CLO is under new management and they are doing a great job with transparency and accountability at this point.
Well, and we, like I said, we do need to have you on another time to talk about that agency, because I don't understand it. And I'm fairly certain that probably other people don't either. And it's an important one to understand. But let's get back on topic here, because I think this is the part that I'm really, you'll notice there's a lot of, there's a lot of orange on that page. So one of the arguments that Julie and I have had about any kind of vouchers or tax credit system or whatever is, if you put into the rules or the law or anything that you have a way for people to get money for managing that money or sending out that money or bringing people in. I mean, if there's a contractor percentage in there, then you're in trouble. And so I was looking at it, just what we talked about a minute ago. The state of Oklahoma drew down 100% of the funds, which were, now listen, Oklahoma, 39 billion. Am I right? $39 billion?
Million.
39,919,354 $354. Okay. So Bridge the Gap Digital Wallet, the Office of Educational Quality and Assessment, transferred $8 million in advance to Class Wallet on August 14th, 2020 for program costs and $366,000 for administrative costs. It appears that funds were paid. I'm trying not to, gnash my teeth when I say this. It appears that funds were paid prior to actual costs being incurred for the program. So how often do you just go to the grocery store and go, here's $200, I'll come back and get my groceries?
Well, again, this is where, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot over the next 6 months as I release some other audits. Oklahoma is failing in their contracting process. With anything
clearly,
you want to have, obviously you're going to have to make a payment up front for a percentage of what the administrative program is going to cost. But then you can also do percentage of completion throughout the administration, where you're not paying everything up front. Because what happens whenever, what happens if you had paid, not talking about this situation, but any vendor, $400,000 up front, and 2 weeks later they close their business and say, sorry, we're filing bankruptcy. You've got
like we did to an electric car company.
You've got to protect the resources of the state, and you do that through a proper contract that is, again, looking out for the citizens of the state.
Okay, so I'm going to make your point. The $366,000 in administrative funds paid to Class Wallet was used partially to pay a subcontractor to house the application system and perform eligibility determinations, $208,403, and the remaining $157,597 was retained by Class Wallet as a flat administration fee and was not supported by any itemized costs. Okay, so there's $157,000.
Okay, so let's break that down and let's talk about the actual two vendors. So Class Wallet had a platform, a financial platform, kind of like Venmo or PayPal, where they could set up these digital wallets. So what the state of Oklahoma paid them for was to set up all of these digital wallets for these families. But Class Wallet is just a financial platform vendor. They did not have the expertise to determine eligibility. And so Class Wallet contracted with another company called Fax Management. And Fax Management was responsible for taking in all of the financial documentation like tax returns or wage statements, things like that. And you want to have a qualified bonded company to handle that part of it. So we really did not feel like these costs were out of line or that they were overcharged. It was just a matter of how we paid it all up front.
Okay, got it. All right, then it says
distribution of wealth is very expensive, isn't it?
Okay, so it says she's such a nice lady. She didn't bite at that one. So going on here, it says Learn Anywhere Oklahoma, the $11,500,000 contract with Edmentum was paid in total on September 14. And then basically it said not everybody used that. So Edmentum retained the unused allocation amount of $1,734. Okay. And then for several months after the July 31st contract end date. In addition, administrative funds of $500,000 were dispersed to the statewide virtual charter school board on July 30th, 2020. However, the school board only incurred $80,352 in actual administrative costs, and the remaining $419,000 was not returned to the federal agency until May 21st, 2021. You said earlier that the feds like to keep their money in the bank because it makes them interest. well, apparently
it's all about cash management. I mean, would you ladies not like to just hold on to $1 million for a few months and draw some interest off of it?
That's a nice interest.
Interest is up now.
No kidding. So, but that's not ethical, right? I mean, this, to me, none of this, let's say it this way then. Because if you talk about ethics, you have to talk about a person's heart, and nobody knows that, right? But I mean, clearly these people, if we just examine it on a basic level, they don't know what they're doing. It looks like to me. I mean, am I wrong?
And again, you don't know what someone's true motives are, but I believe that these people did not really understand grant management and had no idea that they were not following what the federal requirements are.
Oh, but at what point is ignorance not an excuse of the law?
Well, and Jenny, that's one of the reasons why I kept coming back. We could talk about all of these other actors, but at the end of the day, the state of Oklahoma is failing in their administrative duties for overseeing these federal funds. The state of Oklahoma, whichever agency is put in charge, they have to know their responsibilities. And, GEAR funds were very unique. Okay, so usually whenever, let's just use DHS as an example. Whenever DHS gets a grant, DHS has a team of people who are trained to administer programs. Not that they don't still have findings, but they know the basics. Whenever the GEAR funds came in, it technically went to the governor, and the governor had to make these decisions or as to who was going to administer them. And I'm sure he had help from his, the governor wasn't out here making these decisions himself. He had to have support from his staff.
Correct.
Whoever decided to put these funds in agencies that had no prior experience and could not handle the grant administration, That's where we failed. That was the beginning of the breakdown. They needed to go to agencies that understood grant management. And that's what we've got to make sure we do in the future, or else we're putting our tax dollars on the line to have to be repaid to the federal government.
So I'm just curious. Hey, Julia. Hey, Cindy. Have you seen any of this in the news at all in Oklahoma?
I have not.
Not to this level.
Yeah. It's just not, I mean, and this is all important stuff. So let's go on. So now we're talking about the education stabilization. We're talking about gear funds, and I'm trying to, you've got it broken down really super well in here. And so I'm not sure exactly how to explain to you what section I'm in, but I'm on page 53, if that helps at all. I think it's the part where you're basically talking about your findings, not just explaining, but you're specifically talking about your findings. And it says, condition and context. The state of Oklahoma did not obtain or ensure the availability of the books and records of subrecipients, Tri-County Tech and Class Wallet, administering the skills to rebuild, Bridge the Gap digital wallet, and stay in school programs. Therefore, SAI was unable to verify that any of the gear funds distributed to those subrecipients were used for, hold on, I have to stop because that, I mean, this is really, it's so bad. So basically the whole bottom line is because of who the state turned these over to and because of their lack of keeping records, you basically could not perform a correct audit to determine exactly whether or not the gear funds were spent properly or not. Am I wrong?
You are not wrong. In fact, we had to go ahead. We made the decision to go ahead and go further and demand records from the vendor to try to figure out where these funds were spent and how they were managed. So when that was our first clue that no one had been taking care of the grant funds, because whenever we went to the people at the state level who were put in charge, no one had any records.
Wow.
So this should be, honestly, this particular instance right here should be the reason why we should take no federal funds. I mean, it really should be the reason why, because literally people, and maybe in their heart they were like, oh, you know, it's a crazy time and we just want to get the money where, but even that then just makes them completely go, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll just hobble along. This is somebody else's money and it's millions of dollars, but I'll just hobble along. I mean, to me, I don't see how you get to have an excuse for that. I mean, because it says here, Class Wallet did provide the records requested. So out of all of these groups, the only one that seems to have been really, you know, the one that was keeping the records was Class Wallet. And they said, here's the ones, but the other ones did not.
Well, that's correct. But remember whenever I talked to you about Class Wallet being the financial platform vendor,
right?
And they hired a company to perform the eligibility. The company they performed to determine the eligibility did not keep email records past 90 days. They were destroyed after that. So we were not able to go back and fully look at some of those records. So, I mean, again, that's something the state of Oklahoma should have absolutely been concerned about, was proving the eligibility of who received these funds. Now, we did obtain enough documentation to make that determination, and we reported that, but it took a lot to get into that information. And part of this is going to roll over into the investigative audit of the gear funds that Attorney General Gettner Drummond did request of my office.
Okay, and I was going to bring that up at the end of that because I've got it up here too. Okay, now we're going to go into the part that you had talked about earlier. Are we doing okay on time? I saw you glance down nervously. I couldn't tell if it was the clock or the dog.
The clock. The dog's being really good right now.
I know, she's doing great. Okay, so it says here, Bridge the Gap Digital Wallet Program, the SAI identified 39,634 items totaling $1,707,000, which families were allowed to purchase that did not have an educational purpose. So $1,707,000 basically did not go where it was supposed to go.
That's
right?
correct. That's correct. Now, Jenny, keep in mind, we're looking through all of these expenditures, trying to give a lot of grace, trying to determine, was this needed for the child to learn at home? We came across where someone bought a $1,500 desk. We came across, of course, the things that were reported: Christmas trees, video games, Apple watches, Ring doorbells, all, power tools and the such. We tried to give every bit of grace that we could if we thought it might be something related to education. So that number, it could have been much higher. And if the feds come in and look at it, that number could grow higher if they don't give as much grace as we gave for some of the items.
You may have decided that a Ring doorbell was okay because it told them when the tutor was coming.
Yeah, we did not decide that a Ring doorbell was okay.
I'm just kidding. I was just trying to be graceful, the tutor's here. Look at the.
Yeah, it was really, there were some things that were just really out there that there was no way that you could attach them to any kind of educational learning. And it was specific about educational supplies for learning.
Correct. For 34 of 80, or 42.5%, Bridge the Gap program applicants tested, totaling $50,088 in awards expended and $1,288,000 in projected non-compliance. So that was the Bridge the Gap, $1 million in non-compliance. The proper documentation was not submitted to adequately determine eligibility for the Bridge the Gap program. The application states that the applicant does not file income taxes. However, no additional support was obtained by Facts Management. This is the one that was hired by Digital Wallet to adequately determine eligibility for the BTG program. SNAP, Housing, Social Security, Unemployment, and SAI questioned these costs. SAI identified 4 duplicate BTG awards totaling $7,000. For 3 of 75 Bridge the Gap program applicants tested, totaling $2,891 in awards expended, the applicant's federal poverty percentage was not calculated correctly, and the applicant's federal poverty percentage exceeded the 185% threshold. SAI questioned these costs. So the numbers keep adding up of what wasn't used the way it was supposed to add when the federal government printed money to give the governments of the states money. That's shocking. Okay. And this is what we said originally. SAI noted that published program objectives state clearly that funds are to allow families to afford to keep their children enrolled in the private school they are enrolled in through direct tuition assistance to the families. Therefore, the tuition amount for the eligible families should reflect the amount of tuition the family would have been obligated to pay out of pocket. Now, you want to explain, can you explain just a little bit about what that means? Because I'm going to go into this section. The next section is, how is it that some people were able to get tuition assistance and some were not?
Okay, so now you switched over to the Stay in School program. That
correct.
Was part of the
I'm sorry, thank you. Yes, yeah. Correct.
Okay, so for the Stay in School funds, keep in mind that there was what was called an open house, where preferred schools and others were allowed to enroll earlier than what the go live date was. This entire program was set up on a first come, first serve basis. That's how it was marketed to the public. So I'm sure that there were people out here anxiously awaiting whenever they got to get online and enroll in this, because there were a lot of people who needed these funds, especially for the stay in school funds. So the stay in school funds it was $10 million set aside to help parents pay their portion of the tuition to keep their child in their existing private school. I mean, it was a great idea to design this, but again, it was to help the families. What we found was there was an open house held 2 days prior. 5 exception schools were determined by these 3 heads of nonprofits that had no contract with the state of Oklahoma. They decided to have this open house, allow 5 schools to enroll their students first. And again, I'm saying schools here. It was the schools that were given this preferential treatment. But then we found about another 300 individuals outside of these 5 exception schools just somehow knew to get online and enroll early, some in what appears to be in the middle of the night. So we really believe there is a problem with the preferential treatment given to some individuals when this was marketed as a first come, first served basis with a go live date of 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and these individuals enrolled over the weekend.
All right. So,
and then Jenny, I also have to point out too that in those instances for the 5 exception schools, they were allowed to just have the full $6,500. There was nothing to show that that was what the amount of tuition the parent owed. And there are a lot of scholarships out here. There are lots of things that assist that. This program could have went so much further and helped so many more people if they had really stuck to the original guidelines of the program.
So this is what we're going to talk about now. We wrote an article on our website. This is at rope2.org about this particular situation. Auditor finds Oklahoma allowed outside special interest groups to view FERPA protected private information, and you found that during the gear audit. So we're going to talk about this a little bit right now, and I think this for me personally, this speaks exactly to the reason why we don't want the we don't want the state government or the federal government being at all involved in private school. And I think this is the major reason why right here. So this is on page 56 of the audit. And if you want to find the audit, you actually can. We have linked it in this article. So if you want to go ahead and navigate to Auditor Finds Oklahoma Allowed Outside Special Interest Groups on rope2.org, it should be at the top of our stack right now. You will be able to find, there it is right there. We have the link right there where you can see the actual, that's the press release. And then here's the single audit link. So you can actually go to those and find those yourself and read it. And we're on page 56 of that document that we were just talking about. And it says here, just basically what you said, the SAI identified 45 awards paid to 2 private schools that were not net of applicable employee discounts, totaling $191,000 in overpayments. So then some private schools apparently got money that they shouldn't have gotten. SAI identified 68 awards paid to 7 private schools that were not net of applicable multi-child discounts. So that one was $70,000. 17 awards were paid to 6 private schools that were not net of students Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarship. So basically, the money was given to the families for private school tuition, but if you got a Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarship, for example, you had to take that out. If you had some kind of employee discount or something, you had to take that out of the amount. And yet we were overpaying these families for that.
We were overpaying the schools for that, not the families.
Okay, the schools. But the money was supposed to go to the families, though, Cindy. So I guess that's another question I have is how did that happen in the first place?
Okay, so the way the financial platform worked, if you were a family and you got on and you applied and you were awarded the funds, then your school would also have to be participating. They would have to get onto this financial platform and have a digital wallet created, and they were supposed to turn in the amount of tuition due. So all the family did was get in, provide the documentation. Yes, I meet the economic criteria for getting this. I'm one of the first ones on here. I get the award. The school then submitted what tuition was due, and the money was paid directly to the school. But the family had to apply. Now, what we found, and I believe we reported this, was that there were some families who declined this and said, I didn't apply for this. So we know we have some
No,
problems.
I didn't read that in this.
Well, that is that was a problem that we found. So that will be part that comes out in the investigative audit as we look into that.
Okay, so to go on what you said, exemption private schools. So there were 279 approved applications totaling $1,800,000 in tuition assistance, averaging $6,460 per award, paid to 5 different exemption private schools. And these 5 private schools received significant preferential treatment because they were allowed the following exemptions: early access to the application system, like you said, the full $6,500 limit per student. So they didn't even stop and go, well, do they have a Lindsay Henry Nicole scholarship? Let's take that out. They just were given the amount of money, the full amount. Enrollment exceptions for new students that had not previously attended the school. So if you hadn't previously attended the school, you weren't supposed to get the tuition assistance, but they gave it to them anyway. And then it says that those 5 exemption schools represented 5.15% of all private schools awarded funds. However, the exemption schools were awarded 18, almost 20% of the total funds spent. So that's pretty significant that these 5 schools were apparently getting quite preferential treatment here. Then it goes on to say involvement of special interest groups in the exemption school selection and transparency issues. According to email records reviewed by SAI in discussion with FACS management staff members, the list of the 5 exemption schools was provided by the president of Libertas Consulting, LLC, an SIS program administrator who was a senior advisor to a special interest group while administering the SIS program. Well, so, I went out and looked this up. And so I wanted to just make sure that we had that here.
And who is Libertas?
So Jennifer Carter, this is Jennifer Carter. I think you can see her now. This is from LinkedIn. Jennifer Carter is president at Libertas Consulting, LLC. So let's see what else she does. She was once the chief of staff at the Oklahoma State Department of Education for Barisi. And it's interesting to me because I do have a screenshot where she has it on here. She is actually the Oklahoma coordinator for children. Oh gosh, what is the group? I'm having some kind of a brain freak out.
Not the Echo?
No, not Echo. It's one of the school choice organizations. And she doesn't have that on there anymore, which is interesting. She's the Oklahoma coordinator for the same one Corey DeAngelis works for.
Oh, UNESCO? Or
no. School choice organization.
Yeah. I can't.
Gosh, I know. I don't know. Hopefully somebody is watching will type that in there and go, look, you morons. It's this.
Anyhow.
How we can forget that? I just literally don't know. I can tell you all the people's names, but for somehow, anyway, she is the Oklahoma coordinator for very large school choice organization. And that's who she is. So she was apparently administering this. Apparently administering this program. And yet she is a private consulting firm. Jennifer Carter's husband, Ray Carter, also works for OCPA, where he is an editorialist for OCPA, or Oklahoma Council for Public Affairs, which is also considered to be a nonprofit lobbying organization. Who was a senior advisor to a special interest group while administering the program. Emails show that this individual was given authority to create the direction of the SIS funds without entering into a contractual agreement with the state of Oklahoma. The state of Oklahoma did not identify a separate COVID-19 emergency educational need application to these 5 private schools in their published program objectives. The state was not transparent in the selection of these 5 exemption private schools, and the state did not report the use of the SIS funds. That seems fairly significant to me.
It is very significant. And this will be part of the investigative audit going forward.
Okay, and so to even go on, because this is where I have little question marks on here that I was reading, and it says, the SAI identified the following issues in our review of these exemption schools. The majority of SIS funds paid to these 5 exemption private schools do not meet the published program objectives of the Notice of Grant Award. And they're supposed to be used for families and not given to the school, like we talked about. For 2 private schools with 139 SIS awards totaling $899,000, tuition was free for all students.
Yes, we did find that. And, I think that there's also the concern that, well, maybe there weren't donations coming in during this time, but we traced back to see what other federal funds they were given through other programs, because there were many different COVID programs during that time, and they did receive substantial other federal funds.
So basically, these 2 private schools that are tuition free, meaning they did not charge anybody tuition, got almost $1 million, not almost $900,000 from these funds, thanks to an administrator that was not, that was a private organization, a private individual without a contract with the state, right?
That's correct.
Okay. For 3 private schools with 140 awards totaling $902,000, the family of the student was only responsible for 10% or less of the total tuition costs based on income level. So you had almost $2 million in assistance given to schools or to families where they didn't really even qualify. So I'm going to say this is just me. Mrs. Byrd is not saying this. Mrs. White is saying this. So this is our contention from the moment go with this tax credit voucher through private schools. No, we're giving it to families. No, we are clearly seeing what happened here with federal funds. And if you honestly believe that this tax credit thing is going to be handled any different than this, when you have private organizations meeting with the tax commission, according to our information, I think you're wrong. And I will just say hashtag rope is right. We've been right on numerous things. And I guarantee you that what you're seeing right here in this report is going to happen on down the line if we decide we're going to keep doing this. So sorry, I had to just do a little editorial. All right. These private.
I do want to clarify just something very, very quickly here.
Please do.
Out of the legislation that was ran this past year, the voucher bill versus the tax credit, I did feel like the tax credit was the much better path for transparency and accountability of the two.
Okay. All right.
If they don't do what they just did in this other.
We need to make sure we have proper controls put in place, that the tax credit is truly benefiting the families, not any middlemen. And we really need to make sure that the process is set up properly to start with, and that we don't have outside interest groups making the rules up. We need to make sure we're taking care of the tax dollars.
Well, and that is the biggest part. Okay, so I'm winding it down. We're only 10 minutes over, but we warned you. And I'm winding it down. We're almost at the end. The state of Oklahoma failed to verify the actual tuition obligation of the families, which may have resulted in excessive payments to the schools. These funds were not intended to financially support private schools. These funds were intended to financially support families impacted by COVID-19. And then on the almost the last page, it says this, and I want to close with this, and then we can talk about, anything else. The state of Oklahoma allowed significant amounts of SIS funds, these funds, schools to be paid directly to private schools for tuition costs that did not meet the program's published objectives. For example, in excess of the family's actual out-of-pocket tuition costs, like we just talked about, or no COVID-19 related hardship. However, and this is the sad part, and this is the part that we need to end on, so that we really put an exclamation point on how bad this was. SAI noted that 657 students of families that appeared eligible were denied funds because they were no longer available. So,
yeah,
we like to talk about how we're going to help people and we're going to help people. But what we find out is that when the right people are put in charge, what they do is help the people they want to help. Because there were 657 students here that did not get the help because they gave almost $2 million to people who didn't deserve it. So am I right about that or not?
You are correct about that. What we found was that parents who had applied and attested that they had not suffered an economic hardship due to COVID, which was part of the criteria for being awarded the grant, they were still given the money. And of course, there was the early enrollment for the exception schools where the money went to the schools rather than paying the parents' portion. And there were 657 families who did qualify and did not receive any assistance. I'd also point out, not just changing subjects, but jumping back to the Bridge the Gap program.
Yeah.
We put a program out here for $1,500 per family, and it was spent on things that didn't qualify, where if you had bought Chromebooks for these students to learn at home, I mean, that's just a suggestion. It wasn't my place to make the decision on these. But you could have given one to 50% of the students in the state of Oklahoma who needed a Chromebook to learn from home, rather than just allowing people to go on a spending spree with these tax dollars.
Well, again, I think that just that one statement of yours highlights why we're so happy that you have this job and fought for you to keep this job in the face of, huge dark money coming in. Yours was the largest dark money election I think in the entire state for this year, or this last year. And,
against you, not for you.
Yes. Sorry. Money against you. Yes. Money spent against you. Dark money spent against you. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate. I mean,
it's alarming.
And it's excellent work. Excellent. I mean, you have documented everything. I will say this again. You have documented everything in here, and it does bother me. And I understand it because people, their eyes roll back in their heads. Most people, they say, oh, I've looked into Cindy. I'm going to elect her as the SAI. But then they just go, well, I elected her, I trust her. So I'm just going to do whatever. And that's the way so many people do to every elected official, is we say, well, we elect them. Now we just trust them to do their job. Clearly, though, that you found out by doing your job that we have a lot of people that aren't doing their job, and that we need to really, really pay attention and be thankful to you and your office for what you're doing.
Yes.
Well, I think this is a great time for me to talk about what a wonderful team I do have in my office. Yeah. It's a very small team, but we all care about this office, and we care about making sure taxpayers really understand what goes on with their money. And my team does a terrific job. What we put out, whenever we get pushback or people try to say, oh, that's just a hatchet job, or they don't know what they're talking about, I can assure you, as a CPA who values my CPA license, it's my livelihood. Everything we put out, we have documentation to back it up. And not only that, we are so responsive to open records requests, to where if an individual who really wants to be engaged, if you want to question me, that's your right. You should question every elected official. But if you want to question any of the documentation that we have for our findings, I am so happy to show you exactly what I'm seeing, because I guarantee you, when you actually see what I'm showing you, you're going to be upset.
Well, if people can't read, I mean, if people can't read this, and again, I understand, I do, but if you were to read it, I think you would be so aggravated, because this money comes out of your pocket. And at this point, it doesn't really come out of your pocket. It's much worse. They're printing it. And that's why it costs $47 for a loaf of bread right now, because we've got inflation, because our money doesn't mean anything, because they keep printing it, and then they print it, and then we do this with it. Right. It should be so offensive to every tax-paying American that this is going on, and everybody should just keep you in their prayers. And, thank you for what you're doing, and for, the work that you're doing. But beyond that, and I hate to keep harping on this, but I'm going to, and Julia, you said it perfectly a minute ago. We have these organizations that are school choice organizations that are out there, and they collect millions and millions and millions of dollars. And yet, why is that money not going to be spent to create education funds, or, like you said, Cindy, to buy things for kids that need the things? Why is that money being used to fuel political campaigns or to push legislation? So, this is all political nonsense. And if they're not doing it for the kids themselves, they're doing it for political gain, or they're doing it as a crony, some kind of crony mechanism. And to me, that's what this sounds like. I mean, the 5 selected schools, and yet we have, so many hundreds of parents that needed the money that aren't getting it. So you put private people in charge of federal money that they use to crony. Well, and that's what it sounds like to me.
And we kind of skipped past this part, but it's very important. We do have information that the tax commission is inviting in some of these same people that cheated before. So that's very alarming.
And the tax commission is creating the rules for the tax credit law that was just passed this last year. And that should upset people. And, people talk about the swamp, and they say that frequently, well, DC, it's just a swamp. Oklahoma has its own swamp. And I got to tell you, a lot of the people that are in the Oklahoma swamp, you'd recognize them possibly, but they're behind so many different things that we don't know about. And I hate to talk about political stuff while you're online, Cindy. So, do you have anything to say to close out the audit? Because, by the way, and I want to make sure that people understand this, the education part was just one small part of a larger audit, and it was multiple hundred pages of work that you've done. So again, good job.
Thank you. So yes, I do want to say one more thing in closing. I've worked for the auditor's office now for 26 years. It's been a passion of mine. Government is so big, it's like a big puzzle. You got to understand it. It's all fueled by money, and everybody wants a piece of it. When I think about education, for the first 22 years of my career, I didn't audit education. That was not something we were allowed to touch. And I got thrown into the deep end of auditing education immediately upon taking office as state auditor. I had no idea what a firestorm of politics it really is. Because again, I'm a CPA, I'm an auditor, but I do know what I see whenever I see it. Education gets the biggest chunk of our budget every year. and government is the best paying vendor. And we got to make sure that we've got to make sure we're taking care of these funds. We can do better for our children of the state. Just basic common sense decisions about where the money goes. And I have an education audit, a State Department of Education audit will be coming out. We will have some good things there. I hope you invite me back. I'd like to talk about that.
Oh, absolutely, we will.
And again, we have many education audits in the pipeline, things that we've never really had before to look at that have been thrown at me. And we're going to get to the bottom of education in this last 3.5 years that I'm serving as your state auditor. And again, I'm presenting facts to you. And, keep in mind, again, I'm a CPA. I'm not going to put something out here where I'm going to lose my license, but I am going to tell you the truth, regardless of any backlash I get. And it's time that we all started paying attention to where the dollars go in education and how they're being managed. And again, that's just a little sneak peek of what's going to be coming out, but I do think you'll find that audit very useful as well.
So what's the biggest expense in the budget? What agency spends the biggest part of the budget?
Well, in our state appropriated dollars, education gets 52%, and that does include higher education.
So even over half of the budget goes to education. So, and I won't get into how many schools are failing and all of that kind of thing, but you're right. We've got to pay attention. And again, I just thank you. And
one more little statistic here.
Oh, yes, please do.
We were tasked to look at fiscal year 21 for education. In fiscal year 21, for K through 12 education, $7.6 billion was put into education. Of that $7.6 billion, 0.26% was all that was retained for the administration of the State Department of Education. So if we're only tasked to look at 0.26%, where do you think you're going to find the fraud, waste, and abuse in education?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, no, Cindy, say that one more time.
A whole new thing.
So in fiscal year 21, $7.6 billion was given for K through 12 education. Of that $7.6 billion, 0.26% was used for the administration of the State Department of Education. That's a drop in the bucket. And now we're tasked to audit the State Department of Education. So where do you think the most fraud, waste, and abuse will be found?
In the other 7.6 billion.
Exactly. So again,
well, how do we even get into that? How could you even get into looking at that then? That's another question.
Well, you're just going to have to stay tuned, Jenny. I'm going to lay all of this out for you in an audit of the State Department of Education. And I'm going to point out what taxpayers really need to be looking at and what they should be concerned about.
Good. Well, again, we almost made it to an hour 30. And you were like, what are we going to talk about for an hour?
I did wonder that. I wasn't sure we would have enough material, but I think I could talk to you ladies for another hour.
You probably could.
We never.
So let's get going.
Stopping place.
I better get off and get some work done for the taxpayers today.
Honestly, Cindy.
For being on. Thank you so much.
Thank
you. I mean,
ladies.
honestly, I just can't thank you enough. Thanks for taking the time with us, but also thank you for what you do.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very
God
much.
bless you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye. Oh my gosh, that was a great interview.
Talk about
that woman is so smart and
a woman of excellence and integrity. I'm so thankful for her.
Yeah. Yes. I honestly, I can't even say how much everybody should read that section of the audit. I mean, I know that people like to yap, and we heard all of that when she did the EPIC audit, and people wanted to get rid of her because she was anti-school choice and blah. She's just doing her job.
Well, and
what she's doing,
the dark money with the school choice. All she's doing is counting the dollars, you know, and they don't like the way she's counting the dollars.
Yeah.
Because they're not spending the dollars correctly. And the like you said, the swamp in Oklahoma is alive and well.
Well, and again, I'm going to repeat it as we close out, because to me, and I'm sure probably to you, this is the most significant part of the whole audit. When we're faced with, OCPA and, all these other school choice organizations shoving money into campaigns to get people elected and then getting them unelected like they did to our friend Jake Merrick,
Yeah.
all over this, right?
Right.
SAI noted that 657, that's not an insignificant number, people. 657 students of families that appeared eligible were denied the award as funds were no longer available because the people in charge, and we've already seen who those people were, ECHO, Jennifer Carter, from Libertas Consulting. These people had 5 schools that they liked, that they preferred. And even though they like to talk about how much they want to help everybody, they're not helping everybody. They're clearly helping the people they want to help.
They're funneling money to their buddies.
Yes. So I think if anything comes out of this report, if anything comes out of this podcast for today, you should be incensed as an Oklahoma taxpayer. You should be, because the swamp is involved here in Oklahoma, not funding the things that they're saying up front that they want to fund. They're funding the things that they want to fund with your money.
Right.
So, and if you don't believe me, read the report. And if you want to tell me that she made it up, you go follow the trail.
Right.
It's perfectly,
Go look for information. I mean, she'll tell you where she came up with every single dollar.
Yeah. So, you can say what you want, but again, and I hated to say it while she was on, because I don't want to make her a political person. She's not. She's an auditor.
Right.
And, we would hope that of all of the state agencies, that would be blind justice, right? We just are following the facts. Numbers are numbers. We're not doing Common Core math here. So,
I wonder if, after she did the EPIC audit, she was able to go to, she had her presentation that she could take basically on the road. And I'm sure that took so much of her time. But she really did, was able to inform the public that way. And I wonder if she's been able to get a way to do some of that after this audit.
Boy, I don't know, because it's like she said, let me get off of here so I can get to work. She's got so many audits in the pipeline, and that is true. I mean, we do need to have her back on to talk about several things, and one of them is the Land Commission, because like she said, she sits on the board of the Land Commission and said, we're not spending the taxpayer money like that. And how many boards and commissions do you have people who actually do that? And
again, how much of our federal federal dollars that we absolutely must have are used to just employ people to manage the tax dollars? I mean, let's just stop. Just and say thank you, but no thank you, and let all of those people go get a productive job doing something besides managing money incorrectly.
So I'm gonna make your point. Incentive grants. The Oklahoma State Department of Education has policies and procedures which require that federal fund payments to local education authorities are not drawn down until they submit a reimbursement request, and the request is approved by OSDE. However, OSDE accepted the $8 million transfer from the state of Oklahoma prior to immediate cash requirements for any local education authority that was awarded the incentive grants. And as of the end of the audit period, $1,512,000 was still unexpended and had not been returned to the federal agency. So how many of these agencies did you hear me read that said, well, the Oklahoma State Virtual School Board was one of them. They kept money. Class Wallet was one of them. They kept money. They were overpaid for what they did and had, took their time reimbursing the federal government for that money. So stop it. I mean, it's just stupid.
Well, I'll say it again. Redistribution of wealth is very expensive.
Well, and don't forget, we're redistributing wealth to people that are friends of the people who are in charge.
Right.
So it's even worse. It's more like a communist country even than an authoritarian, country.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
So I wish people would get more involved. I wish people would pay more attention. But I mean, what are you going to do? They will or they won't.
Thinking that they somehow are going to come out on the winning end of this. You're not. You're not.
That's true. That's true. I wonder how many people get behind this stuff, like the school choice stuff, thinking, well, I'm going to get something out of it. And then what ends up happening is you find out that the only way you're going to is if you're friends with the people who are administrating the grants.
Right.
Oh, well, okay. It's a nice day today. I mean, it's going to be pretty warm, but there's not a cloud in the sky where I'm sitting right now. So I'm probably going to have to go out and do some work, which is...
I'm going to go visit, for heaven's sake.
Oh, good.
Anniversary today. They're having a celebration.
Oh, that's nice, Julia.
Yes.
Well, tell Lauren I said hi, because that's awesome. And if you guys don't remember, for heaven's sake, is the Christian daycare and now school in the Yukon area in Canadian County. So please make sure you look them up and keep them in your prayers. And if you're out in that area, sign up.
Yep. They're looking for some teachers as well.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so we ran through everybody that we were going to have on Wednesday. So I'm just going to let you mention the two that you got yesterday.
Okay.
September 1st was...
September 1st, Linda Murphy's going to come on. Excited to talk to her. I usually, ever so often we'll have a 3-hour phone call, and I haven't gotten to talk to her in a little while.
I haven't either. Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to visiting with her. She's got a very extensive resume of being involved in Oklahoma education and stays on top of things remarkably well through all the years. And let's see, who else did I talk to?
Carmen
Grider. She's going to be on in the middle of September.
22nd.
22nd. And so those are the two new ones that we've added.
And Carmen was, she ran for House in her district and didn't get it. But then she started, she's dovetailing some of the work that I've done on dark money in Oklahoma politics. And she's got, my word, that girl has created this database that is unbelievable.
Amazing. Yeah, she did the work.
One smart cookie, that Carmen Grider. So we're going to talk to her on the 22nd. So we've got a few more to fill in for September, but we're still looking forward to some great interviews in August. And so far, I think we've kicked it. I think we've done great this.
Yeah, we really
16th. Next week will be Brett Farley.
Good.
And we're gonna argue with him kindly, but argue with him about why Catholic schools should get public funding.
I'm so thankful that he's willing to come on and discuss.
I am too,
because I think we'll probably learn something about it and hopefully be able to exchange ideas.
I agree. I mean, it doesn't work. And like we were talking with Senator Bullard, on Wednesday, it doesn't do anybody any good to stand on either side of the street and shriek at each other.
Right.
No, it doesn't do any good to, I don't like the, go along to get along. And so I'll change my perspective so I can just have peace. We're not those kind of girls, are we, Julia?
No. We
No.
we won't even try.
Nah. We're going to hold our positions, but we're not going to scream and yell at you either. So,
Right.
Because it just doesn't help. So, I shall see you. I know I'll talk to you before then, but
Yeah.
I shall see you again anyway on Wednesday, next Wednesday,
Yes.
with Charlie.
Awesome. That'll be great.
All right, everybody, have a great weekend. It will be nice, and just think fall's around the corner.